1979, December 6th, the United States Department of Education is established. Despite editorials by the Washington Post and many other major daily newspapers indicating that there should not be a federal Department of Education. President Jimmy Carter, however, had pushed hard for the establishment of the department as a fulfillment of his campaign promise to the National Education Association to gain its endorsement of him in 1976. And with that endorsement came the endorsement of the entire fraternity of Freemasons across the country who had been supporting public education since their inception. In 1980, on July 9th, the Washington Post printed David Broder's nationally syndicated column in which he described his interview with the National Education Association Executive Director Terry Herndon at the union's annual convention. Broder asked about parents and voters' concern over the poor quality of public schools, and Herndon replied that the convention speakers and delegates, quote, don't know what the answer is. We don't have the answers. Our executive board spent more time talking about the crisis in urban education than any other topic this year, but we have no answer, end quote. In 1982, the NEA sued Suzanne Clark for her published criticisms of the labor union. She was legally defended by Concerned Women for America, and in her book, Blackboard Blackmail, which was endorsed by Dr. D. James Kennedy, she would later relate in that deposition testimony, then NEA President Willard McGuire admitted it would be accurate to say the National Education Association effectively declared war against the new right, and the lawsuit reasonably could be characterized as an example of that declaration. Dorothy Massey with the NEA admitted she maintained about 12 file drawers on the new right, but on the advice of her attorney, she refused to produce any information from those files. On December 2, 1983, the NEA withdrew its suit against Suzanne Clark. In her book, she quoted Kansas National Education Association Executive Director John Lloyd as stating that the National Education Association, quote, is controlled and run by a group of non-educators, well-paid professional staff who have their own agenda, which is not necessarily in the best interests of public education or of the poorly paid teachers who faithfully serve it, end quote. Lloyd is also reported to have revealed that Rules for Radicals author Saul Alinsky hired to train National Education Association staff members integrated radicalism into the union. In 1983, on April 5th, the Washington Post editorial, Political Teaching, accuses the NEA of preparing curriculum materials on nuclear weapons, atomic war, and the American arms buildup, which are political indoctrination. The curriculum is called Choices, a unit on conflict and nuclear war. In early June, John DeMars, director of NEA Peace Programs and International Relations, and Sam Pizzigatti, associate director of NEA Communications, traveled to Nicaragua and made an on-site report which compared Marxist Nicaragua favorably to El Salvador. Their conclusion states that the United States should stop its military aid to the Contras fighting the Marxists in Nicaragua. Why? Because the NEA itself is Marxist. On November 14th, United States Senator Steve Symes writes a letter in which he states, quote, I am writing you today to alert you to a radical big labor takeover of the schools in your community. The National Education Association, a union second only to the Teamsters in size and power, is about to seize total control of public education in America. Unless you and I take immediate action on this emergency situation, the NEA will succeed in pushing legislation through Congress that will force compulsory unionization on every public school in the country. This is not an idle threat. It is just one part of the NEA's legislative program for the 98th Congress, adopted at its July 1982 convention in Los Angeles. Further, The National Education Association has publicly boasted of its plan to seize control of the agencies and boards that decide who is allowed to teach and what is to be taught. The NEA has become the most powerful special interest group in the United States. Their lobbying has brought about a 17-fold increase in federal education spending in the last 20 years. In 1982, their contributions of $1,183,215 and their army of volunteer campaign workers helped elect 222 congressmen, a majority of the House of Representatives. But instead of using its influence to improve the quality of American education, the NEA has presided over the virtual crumbling of our nation's schools. The National Education Association distributes, quote, Combating the New Right, end quote, which is a training program developed by the NEA Western States Regional Staff. It criticizes Phyllis Schlafly, Mel and Norma Gaber, Howard Phillips, and other members of the New Right. The program tells a teacher, quote, you are a target of the far right, end quote, if, quote, you ask students to examine their values, teach sex education, ever indicate it may be okay to lie, teach about values different from those of the student's parents, teach that anything goes, or if you feel it's okay, do it. Train your students to be global citizens, teach humanism, etc., end quote. A number of NEA state affiliates will follow the NEA lead in this area and produce their own publications, such as the Michigan Education Association's far-right extremist attacks on public education. In 1983 and 84, in the NEA's Today's Education 1983-84 annual edition, you can read this, quote, the National Education Association believes that communications between certified personnel and students must be legally privileged. It urges its affiliates to aid in seeking legislation that provides this privilege and protects both educators and students, end quote. Parents, ladies and gentlemen, are not to know what communication occurs between their children and these teachers. In 1988, February 1st through the 5th, the Soviet American Citizens Summit, a New Age networker, Barbara Marx Hubbard is an organizer, is held in Alexandria, Virginia, with a delegation of approximately 100 Soviets coordinated by the Soviet Peace Committee. According to a 1985 State Department report on Soviet active measures, the SPC is linked to the Soviet Central Committee's International Department, which was created by Stalin to carry out subversion within other countries. Interesting is the fact that the Education Task Force at the summit recommended that the National Education Association guide a global computer program. May 13th through the 16th, along with the Carnegie Council on Ethics and International Affairs, Foreign Policy Association, Global Tomorrow Coalition, International Development Conference, and others, the NEA co-sponsors the American Forum on Education and International Competence. Some of the workshop topics include developing strategies for internationalizing state curriculum, the United Nations University, 10 years of thinking globally, acting locally. Will they use it? Implementing global education initiatives, the United Nations in global education, political